Good evening and welcome to TDM Talk Show. Macau's unique features have attracted many social scientists who were caught by the city's idiosyncratic history, culture and society. Our guest is currently a Macau-based journalist and researcher who completed a PhD in social anthropology about the Macanese, Portuguese and Chinese communities of Macau. Sheyla Zandonai has authored a number of articles and book chapters on the city's identity, heritage and urban transformations. Sheyla Zandonai, thank you very much for joining us and welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me here tonight.
Let's start by talking about your encounter with Macau. You're originally from Brazil.
Yes.
This very first encounter was, I believe, over 10 years ago, right?
Yes. I first came to Macau in 2006 as part of my PhD research. There was my choice for an object of studies to come to the city and conduct research about the urban nature of Macau's development from a contemporary point of view, trying to retrace some of its standing structures or features that could help define the character of place or the identity, which is a bit of a complicated word, but as maybe stick to character. And I came here first time to conduct then field work, which is an important part of the anthropologist's research work. For several times engaged in this project, I would often come for a period of a few months, so 2006, and then I came back for 3 years, subsequent years for periods of field work. And I stopped for a little while to write the PhD dissertation and would come back later on rather professional engagements in Macau, proper.
And the question is why? I mean, what caught your attention? I mean, when and how was the first time that you came across Macau?
Well, I was then doing my PhD in France. Maybe I mentioned that, I don't remember right now. But I was already
Paris,
moved,
right? Yes.
yeah, in Paris. I was at the École des Hautes Études, and I had already moved to France to do my master's degree and then pursue my PhD. And at that point, I was very interested in the multicultural cities and the encounter of different populations within the same urban space and the results that would come out from that. I was living in Paris, which is a very multicultural place. Right. So I was very interested in those matters, and particularly in a Chinese neighborhood in that city, in Paris. But at that point in discussions with my supervisor, he thought that it would be more interesting to leave, because that's what anthropologists usually do, to move a little bit their familiar references. So for me, it was a possibility of doing that, having a background from a Portuguese, let's say, a country with a history of Portuguese presence, and coming here to another place in which the Portuguese have been present as well, and being able to work with a frame of comparison by me being a Brazilian person myself. So it was very, at the beginning I didn't know much about Macau, but as I started reading a little bit to get informed about the place before coming, I thought I could not miss out the chance of seeing what the results of the Portuguese presence were in the East. And for me it was also first time in China, first time in Asia. I have never been here. So it was an act of courage in a way, because I came by myself. I had the support of my host institution in France, but most of the work of an anthropologist in the field is alone. So I came here, I didn't have any contacts, I didn't know anyone, except for a couple of researchers who received me after I managed, through a professor in France, to get to know these people through email, to still good friends of mine in Macau who first received me at the Ricci Institute when I came.
And now tell us about what you found. I mean, without having to go into much detail, because I'm sure there's plenty of it. There's a lot. So the dissertation title is Macanese, the English translation, because it was originally written in French, right?
Yes.
Something like Macanese, Portuguese, and Chinese identification, social and historical relations in the social-cultural construction of Macau, a global approach to the specificities of the city in the production of place. Am I getting it right?
Yes.
So, in a nutshell, what was the main argument or hypothesis, and what have you found here?
Well, the way, maybe I should explain a little bit the way in which anthropologists work. We usually have a few research questions that we can use to approach the field, but once you get to the field, it depends on the people you encounter and the kind of information they can share with you and provide. This works with the building of relationships of trust in which people, you have spent time with people, that's what differs a little bit the work of a scholar in the field of social anthropology from a journalist. You engage with the field for a long time and the same people, regular interviews and so on. So for me, obviously, the main entry points were the people who could speak Portuguese. My Chinese skills are still a little bit not very developed, but it still work better lately. But I would use mainly the language that I speak as my mother tongue to have access to people who could tell me things about Macau, their own personal histories or stories and events that took place just after the handover. So I came here first time, the only casino which was open was the Sands. So I was looking into those two big changes, the handover and the gambling liberalization, and how they have impacted the city and the three main populations that have participated in the construction of this place, so to speak, in the long run. Yes, which are the Macanese, the Portuguese, and the Chinese. Obviously, for cultural research or social research reasons, the Macanese have more, let's say, attractive characteristic because they are very specific, a very specific population from Macau, and that was also the suggestion or the advice from my supervisor back then, that it would be important to try to understand, especially because I was writing for French academia. As you know, in Europe, it's very common that the European countries would study their own former colonies or territories that were under their own possession during colonial times. So it was different bringing something that belonged to the Portuguese Empire in the East to be discussed in a place where people were mostly looking into other histories connected to the French Empire. So there's an audience, right? So I was doing this research also for a specific public in a way. The language I work on was French, so it directs a little bit what I was looking when I came to Macau as well. But obviously the Macanese are, I could say, the backbone of the work I did. Mostly because they were my main informants or respondents, as we usually say, and having actively collaborated and often helping with my annoying questions, because I mean, it's part of it's the nature of the job, right? So we have to push a little bit sometimes, and we understand it's very delicate because it's people's personal lives, but everything, of course, is often, I'd say, always protected. They're all anonymous in the sense that I don't use the real names, and well, this is part of the method, but we may not go over that.
And in that respect, were you surprised with what you found? I mean, what people were willing to share with you? Because the issue of identity is crucial for the Macanese community this unique, distinctive identity, which goes way beyond a mere mixture of East meets West, because over the centuries, something on its own has been in the making. But now that we are, and you were a few years into the handover, what was the general mood that you felt?
Well, I was always working with, of course, previous works that have been done, mostly Pina Cabral's and Catherine Clayton's, which are books published, but also articles by other scholars. And I found out that that many people have been conducting research in Macau on the social anthropology field. What I found out, because I had met Pina Cabral before too, so in conversations, and I realized coming here that because I am Brazilian, it changes the rapport, right? I have with my the people who talk to me, my respondents, because we share something. We were. I will use the word colony, even though I know this is not going to be probably. It generates a little bit of a controversy when this word is used in relation to Macau, but we can talk about that later.
Arguably a colony or something.
I think there's several types of colonial rule. It does, of course, you have different forms, and Africa is one case, very different from Asia, in not only in what regards the Portuguese empire, but also other Europeans' empire. It was a very different, it was more of a commercial or a economical relation, but not only. Of course, there was power affirmation and dominance as well. It doesn't mean that, I mean, of course, in Africa, in Brazil, we think about a full domination. Here we can talk in terms of more of a crypto or concealed kind of rule.
Some authors even call it a sort of situation of de facto co-sovereignty, at least for some period of time, right?
Yes, I believe so. I think that when I want to be clear on this, when I raise the point of colony or Macau having been under colonial rule for a certain period of time, I want to stress the fact that it doesn't mean the whole history of Portuguese presence here, which is very commonly found in books or articles about Macau, saying 450 years of Portuguese rule over Macau. It's not true. I mean, there has been a lot of work done, historical accounts, and work with Portuguese and Chinese sources, which are the most important in that case, because, you know, there are many documents are still in China. And there was, well, the Portuguese were here in an agreement based on private initiative, mainly because they were important traders, and they were making, well, I mean, I'm not a historian, but I read some of the works on that, and they were links to the larger regional trade, or even going all the way to Europe as other traders would be at that time. But they happen to be located here. The reasons for that are several. They are sometimes contradictory. Some of them are more of a myth-like foundation of Macau. So I think these are always very interesting, but we should be careful also about these ideas that the Chinese gave a stone in which they inscribed that Macau belonged to the Portuguese, or the Portuguese had the rights to stay in Macau, and then nobody knows where the stone is. So these kinds of things, I mean, it's interesting, it gives color to the history of place, but there are also facts that can be proved by documents, so it is important.
Talking about the Macanese community and the post-handover situation, well, it's been a feature, the issue of survival and sustainability of the community as we know it, or at least as it used to be in the pre-handover period. What have you found in that respect? I mean, based on the fieldwork, observation, fieldwork interviews?
I think it is, for me, it's fascinating because the point I argue in my PhD dissertation is that the Macanese represent, in a way, a trend of identities as we can see these days, that people are becoming more I use the word globalized, but not as something recent. I think globalization, I would rather refer to the word system approach. There were different periods in which different civilizations and peoples have connected through different means. So globalization is just one stage of this developments that we've seen for many centuries, actually. So I think the mechanism was very specific about these populations, that they were born as a global population already, with a reach to a world that they are very localized in terms of an identity. It's a territorial-based identity, but it takes stock on global processes. I say this because what I claim is that they are, in a way, a representation or the embodiment of all these migration movements that happen in Macau, and find a way of being localized, I mean, in place by the formation of this population. I don't know if I'm making myself clear,
sure,
but
sure.
so it is an identity that is very global in the sense that it captures or capitalizes on several other cultures and histories through the migration processes we have observed. You said it's not only Portuguese and Chinese. There's a lot other Asian populations, even European ones, that belong somehow to this diverse cultural genealogy that the mechanists claim they have. So this is very special to this population. And to go back to the question of identity race, I think that's, even though it's been always discussed in terms of vulnerability or not weakness, but being jeopardized or put in danger.
Being absorbed by the majority that surrounds us, of course, which is the Chinese.
The Chinese, of course. There is a trend of Sinicization. I've noticed that. We can say that the mechanisms as a population have several. It's very complex in the way that you have different.
There are different shades of mechanisms, so to say, right?
Exactly. So that's what I think, and I was reflecting on that recently, because I was working on those questions for that conference where we met. It's actually what makes that identity very strong, because it's not the type of identity that has the support of the nation state, right, behind it. Okay, you're Brazilian, I am Portuguese, you're French, you have the whole state support backing you. And the mechanisms, they have multiple resorts to these traditional elements that constitute what we call identities, officially speaking. And the fact that they have become stronger in a way that they continue to project that identity locally and more toward China now, we can go over that too, shows that there is, of course, a strong or high adaptability of the people themselves, but also the fact that they gain force by having to find a way to affirm themselves in the city. And that means, that, to me, that there is a strength, actually. So we usually talk about the mechanism.
Resilience there, right?
Yes, there is a resilience into that. And even though they are very diverse within the group themselves, itself. I mean, you have people who would claim that they have more Portuguese cultural background in the family. Others, there are more and more Sinicized, so to speak. But there are always several elements, or the fact that they belong to this place, that they are the sons of the soil or the land, that binds them together in a way.
And something that you've been working on and studying regards the link or the interaction or the reflection, I shall say, between identity and a community's identity and the urban transformations. Because you've witnessed yourself. You're saying that when you first came to Macau, 2006, we only had sands.
Yes.
Venetian was not yet completed. It was in 2007. And since then, we've seen a once-in-a-lifetime transformation in terms of urban landscape. What impact has it had in terms of identity? And because there's a layer here when it comes to one's identity and the space that surrounds us. And of course, we also have the heritage question looming large here, right?
Yes, I think it's the pace is very well. I mean, compared to China, it's not as fast, probably in certain parts of China. But it was very, especially coming from Europe, because that's my base of comparison at that point in time. Yeah. Europe is, I mean, Paris is a UNESCO protected city, and every year you go back and it's the same. Of course, there are changes, but it's not what you can witness in a place like China or Macau specifically. So what I've noticed, and everybody knows that, of course, is that the amount of investment and capital that have been poured in the city and the transformation of its urban landscape is massive. We're talking about massive capital being injected in the economy, mostly the casino economy and the casino development. So it takes the spotlight in a way. It's obvious. We can see. That's how we can see. And then heritage comes as well. So I think these are part of two. This is some work I'm doing, but not yet published. But this is part of, from my understanding, all these have been thought through, right? So it's part of what I would call the China program for Macau, or China's national agenda. How does Macau fit into the new Great China Plan, or that comes with the reunion after the colonial rule or the colonial administration leaves the city. So both gambling and heritage are part of this project from the way I see it. What is a little bit worried from my point of view is that I don't really think that the people who claim they are from Macau or they belong to Macau, this would mean anyone who has legitimate rights to claim it, the residents, so to speak, Macnese, Chinese or Portuguese or other people, Filipinos, of course. It's not clear the ways they are actually participating in this. So there's a lot of money and money deciding the ways the city should be transformed, and the people are not really being able to voice out what they would like rather to have instead of massive casinos and so on. So that links to the question of heritage, which I think became, even though it's also part of the program, it became also a way that people found here to vocal or to voice their discontent of about what's going on with the city. So they found a way by holding on to heritage to claim that this is the city that they would rather have than the other city that's happening.
In opposition to the casino.
In a way, in opposition. It is in
overdevelopment?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, I would use this term because of the scale of Macau. And because what is being questioned is the ownership. So who have the rights to claim the city, right? Who the city belongs to. So I think that people is being a little bit, if I could use that word, dispossessed of their rights of.
In other words, it's not my home anymore. It's not my Macau anymore.
Yes.
Have you heard that a lot?
Yes,
I mean, in your
very often, very often. At the very beginning, but then you realize that people will also accept at some point, because there's transformations clear in the way people live their lives. And they accept, but they also make requests and then complain. It's not on the same way that people usually expect that people would voice their complaints or what they would like to see changed, as we see in Western democracies. But there are ways that people find here talk about what they would like to see, and I think heritage was one of them. I just have the Gia Lighthouse case in point, which was a kind of a turning point in the way the Chinese population starts engaging with this historical fabric of the city, which we, from an external point of view, usually perceives as being European
or Portuguese or Western.
Yeah.
Interesting point that you're raising. The looking at heritage and even the Portuguese or European heritage of Macau, not as heritage of Portugal or of the Portuguese, but heritage of the Macau people, who are, of course, by and large Chinese in the overwhelming majority, and having Chinese involved actively in protecting heritage, something like the Gia Lighthouse case. You regard this as a turning point in terms of engagement and even identity?
Yeah, I think so. I think it is a... as I said, it's very hard, this me interpreting a little bit, but I think it seems to be very hard to fight a force so strong as gambling in this town, and all the powers that be. And we all know that in politics, the line that separates politics from private interests are very...
blurred.
Well,
yes.
You could use blurred, or sometimes really don't exist,
Or
right?
some people even argue that collusion is the name of the game all over.
Yes, yes. I mean, it's not specific to Macau. At first, of course, because we are very close and the city is small, you tend to think that it's, wow, it's because it's very close. You see the legislators around and the big investors, but it's not a thing that is specific to Macau. This happens in other parts of the world within a more or less degree. But I think heritage is one of the, and I mean heritage, the UNESCO one, but not only that, because you know there's an ongoing attempt or endeavor to list more and more and protect. I always use the word protect. List in this case doesn't mean listing as word heritage, but as local
heritage.
Yes, local heritage. The right to maintain this legacy that retells past histories of the city, and that kind of allow people to entertain memories, which are also a form of legacy that they want or would like to pass on. So I think it is. At first, I also thought, well, that's interesting, because I would perceive those buildings as Portuguese, and having the colonial question in mind, why would they embrace the Chinese in that case? That was my first question. But then I realized that this is part of the landscape, and it's not the fact that it was built by a church group or a military governor, but what matters is the fact that it belongs to your experience of the city. So maybe you should go there when you were a kid, play around that area or that square. So it belongs to the memory of the people, and at that point it becomes something that belongs to you, as in part of your memory, your personal history in that city. So it is a way that I think that for people to show their attachment to Macau. And I mean, people, it doesn't matter the ethnicity or the national background in that case, but people who grew up here and are familiar with this place, have their roots here, and they claim their belonging to Macau this way, not the political traditional way, but by trying to show that this is what matters. It's a lifestyle or a way of living that is connected to their formation as person.
You've been addressing the engagement and civic participation of different social groups who've been focusing on heritage protection. What about the authorities' approach to it? Because, of course, we have the Historic Center being listed as UNESCO World Heritage. That was in 2005. And over again, we've seen, of course, in the official discourse, in the narrative, some attention being paid to heritage conservation. But, of course, critics cast a skeptical eye on what's really in it, if it's something more or less shallow without much content in it, and also, of course, the balance between heritage conservation and the surrounding areas, the buffer zones, which should be regarded as part of the heritage, they say. What's your take on this debate?
Well, that's a very complex debate because it involves several layers of the decision-making and ownership. In the sense I was saying a little bit earlier, that who can claim actually that this or this belongs to me or us, right? So we have, well, first there's the local level involved, the administration, experts, which in the case of Macau mean mostly architects. We don't have that many people here trained in heritage conservation. More and more, it's a trend, but mostly architects. And also historians engaged a little bit. Okay, this is and then within the local level you have the several departments, and we know very well it's a struggle, it's a drama, as I was told during an interview, especially for the Cultural Affairs Bureau, because they have a mandate, but they know that there are limits, right? They are not spoken limits, but we know that there's a limit, and the limit's private development. And high limits, which is the type of case that we usually see in the press. But it's a lot of work, just maintaining the existing buildings, working on expanding the list, and then coping also with China and UNESCO, then, because everything should be listed as World Heritage has to pass through the Chinese national
And
committee.
it's monitored by, as you're saying, by
it is
the
monitored,
central government
but
in a way, and the UNESCO on the other way.
Yeah, that's the funny part, because usually that's what the procedure instructs, right? That the National State Party is the one responsible for monitoring and calling the attention of the municipalities if they're not doing a proper work. But the case that happened a few years ago linked to the Gia Lighthouse at about the same time, which is the construction of the liaison office
building, yes,
was very interesting in the way that it revealed a little bit that there's some lack of communication, proper communication between the national and the local level, because they were the ones that sent a letter after citizens of Macau reached out to UNESCO because they were worried about the construction. It was 4 different buildings around the Gia Lighthouse. One of them was the liaison office building. They were concerned, and then it came out. Everybody was talking about it. And at that point, the Chinese government sent a letter to the Macau government saying that they were extremely concerned about the situation. But one of the buildings was the Communist Party building that was being raised there. And what they did was to reduce by 3 meters.
Lowered, yeah.
So you see that it's not very easy to find the proper channel of communication in those matters. So there's a lot of overlapping, and the fact that there's overlapping also means sometimes that there's non-decisions being taken. So this is like the procedural part of things, which is complicated, because there may be a good intent, but sometimes the machine is just not working to make that happen. The other thing is that what I've noticed, and this is to go back again to the national agenda or the China's national program for Macau, is that the moment that China has decided to embrace heritage and put forward the campaign to list, because this was done before the handover. The whole work started by the Portuguese administration of Macau, mainly a few architects in the beginning. And then at some point, China, through the liaison office, became very engaged in the promotion of heritage, Macau's heritage, not Portuguese, but the Macau's heritage. And So the participation has been ongoing, but in the beginning they were trying to sort it out, how to present and the whole discourse and narrative. So this is something that we have to pay attention to, because it's a state rhetoric, right? It comes with the whole history of the melting pot, East meets West, in harmony, and this is, there's a part of truth to it, but it's not the whole truth. And it becomes clear that the intention is gradually to link heritage to tourism industry and not to culture or history, which are two areas to which heritage belong to more closely or more closely related, because it's about people's lives and about the history of a place and the history of the people that were in that place. But what is being done, especially with the UNESCO heritage ensemble, is that it's more and more linked to the industry in a way a little bit commodified, and as a commodity it fits very well China's agenda of selling the package of non-conflict and a very harmonious...
Part of the branding endeavor.
Yeah, that's a very good
Macau.
word for that. Yes, it is branding.
One last question. This regards, let's come back to your own biography, because you are an anthropologist turned journalist, in the sense that your main job now is as a journalist at Macau News Agency, as the editor-in-chief. My question is, how different is Macau through the lens of an anthropologist from that of a journalist? As an object of study, right?
Yes, that's a very interesting question, because in a way I think even when I was doing my PhD research, I started writing for the media, local media, so opinion columns, never as a journalist proper. So it was interesting because it was a window I'd have to exercise a little bit the findings, the small findings I had during my research. But one common thread between two professions, if I may use this word, is the fact that you learn with the people you work with. So you learn with your informants, that's how we would call it. Even in journalism, you could call them the informants, right? The sources, in a way. The way you learn from the people or with the people is different, though. The engagement in anthropology is more, it's an intensive one, in the sense that you have time, ideally, to immerse within a place with a group of people and meet the same people several times and build up the rapport, right? With the people or the respondents. In journalism, it's more of an extensive one. So it's very intense in the sense that you talk to people very often, ideally every day, and they become with time more reliable sources because they also trust more your work or the way you use what they say. But it lacks a little bit of this in-depth approach to matters which do not belong only to daily life, because in journalism you end up by working a lot with daily matters and things like that. What I notice, so this is the part of the relationship with the informants, let's say, the people, right? The other thing is that it changes, and then not like with citizens, but with government departments, and
they're more prudent when you tell them that you're a journalist.
I mean,
way more prudent.
yes, it is. It happens the moment I change. Even today, I still conduct research, and I would reach out to some people I know from previous work and say, I'm working here under the label of my head of researchers, so they are more receptive. But the moment I call, so this leaving a message, is government departments and corporations, they are usually not very receptive to the media in general, and we see that every day in the newsroom. It's just an endless battle to get the information, sometimes not even nothing that is really controversial, just a matter of being
just
something of public
figure or
interest.
something.
Yes. And I don't know what is the culture of communication within the government departments, but it's very different from what I have expected, having lived in other places and seeing how the press works as a reader in that case. So yeah, that's what I would say.
And with this message, I would say, we wrap up our talk. Sheyla Zandonai, thank you very much for joining us. Pleasure to have you on the show. Fascinating stuff.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
And to you at home, thanks for tuning in. We'll be back next week.